Hi everybody and welcome to episode 3 in the Film Scoring for Beginners series. Today let's talk about chord progressions and how you can get a smooth transition in the notes between your chords. If you're new to this channel, be sure to subscribe, hit the like and hit that bell so you get a notice when I have new videos. My name is Mattias and let's take the tour. Okay, I'm well aware that you're all at different levels of musicality and knowledge of music theory, but this video will be kind of the foundation of how you create smooth chord progressions and how you do the voice leading. So in this example we have 3 different variations of the chord progression, and in this case the first one we have the chords played in root position, which means that we always have the root note at the bottom of the chord. I will explain this further later down this tutorial. And in this second example we have the same chord progression but played with some chords in inversions. Then in the third example here we have the same chord progression but with some added coloration. Let's play through these chords and you can let me know which of these examples you think sound the best. Yeah, so personally I think that the third example sounds the best. But sometimes in pop music the second might do very well, because maybe you don't want to have all these extra colorations in your music. Sometimes it's better to go simple. Okay, so let's break down how you can go from this very basic first example to a more advanced, like in this example number 3. So first let's talk about the chords, and in this first example we have a G sharp minor chord, which is a G sharp, it's a B note and a D sharp. Then the second chord is a E major, so we have E, G sharp and the B. The third chord is a B major, so we have a B, a D sharp and a F sharp. And this final chord is a F sharp major. So we have the F sharp, the A sharp and the C sharp. And as I mentioned earlier, this is played in root position. Okay, so let's explain root position, first inversion and second inversion. Root position is when you have the bass note in the lowest note of your chord. So in C major this would be a C. And if we now want to convert this to a first inversion, we move this C an octave up to this C. So we have this chord instead. That's the first inversion of C major. And finally, if we move this E an octave up here to the E here, we will have this chord, which is the second inversion. So we have the root position, first inversion, and finally the second inversion. Great. But how do we then make this to sound more smooth, like in this second example, where we have some inversions? So what I've done here is I've taken this note, the low E here, and moved it up an octave. And then for the third chord I took the top note here, which is C sharp, and moved it down an octave. And then we get this more smooth transition between the notes. We have this B being played 3 times, and we have this G sharp 2 times in a row, and then we have the F sharp 2 times in a row. So this is much more smooth, and it's also much more easier to play when you have done this voice leading. Okay, so how do you apply this to your own chord progressions? Well, say we have this chord progression with an A minor, F, C to a G chord. We could begin by just writing out the notes for these chords. In an A minor we have the A, and we have the C, and we have an E. So let's write those chord notes here. So here we have the first note, and here we have the third, and here we have our fifth. So what's the note in our F chord? Well, we have an F, we have an A, and we have a C. So let's now look and see if we have similar notes between these two chords. We have a C in the first chord and the second one, and we have an A in both these chords. So maybe this A can go to the A in this chord. The same with the C, we go with the C to a C like this. And the E to an F is just a half step. And what we have in the C, we have a C, an E, and a G. So let's do the same thing here between the C, between the F and the C. We have a C here too, so let's continue with the C. And the F maybe can go to the E, and the A can go to our G. So here we just have one similar note between these two chords, but that's okay. And then in the final chord we have a G, the B, and the D. Do we have any similar notes between the C and the G? Yeah, we have the G note here. So let's continue with the G note to this chord. And maybe go to the B with our C. And go down to D with the E. So here we can see so here we easily can see the similar notes between the chords and get a smooth transition. So instead of sounding like this, it could sound like this with the inversions. You probably heard the So that's basically how you make your voice leading between the chords. Okay, so how do we add more color to our chord now when we have a basically smooth transition? We can look at this first chord, the G sharp minor, and in G sharp minor we can add the seventh, which is the F sharp, like you can see in this last sample, and the chord will suddenly sound like this. The same thing with this second chord, we can add the seventh to this one too. And for the E chord we have a D sharp, which is the seventh. So here we can see we added the D sharp as the seventh note. So let's add that below this E. And now we have E and D sharp quite close together, but if it's played higher up in the range, it sounds fine and okay, and it's actually quite nice to have some of these notes quite close. Then we can also move this, the third note, which is the G sharp, we can move it an octave above. And then for the third chord, which is our B. So maybe move this F sharp up an octave. And maybe do the same thing here, add the seventh. But it's a major chord, so it would be an A sharp or a B flat. Then for the last chord, since we're now raising or getting higher in the register, maybe we can move some of these notes up a little bit. So we can take this the A sharp here and move it an octave above, because we have an A sharp in the chord before. As I mentioned earlier, we want to have a smooth transition and as little movement between these notes as possible. So for this last chord we can actually maybe add a 9, because a 9 sounds very nice on this chord. So that would mean we add this G sharp. And to finalize this progression, we can also add some bass a little bit lower in the register. The G sharp, which is our bass note, and then we had an E. Then we went to B, and finally the F sharp. So this is the final version of our progression, with a little bit of extra flavors and the inversions of the chords. So that's basically how you can take a more simple chord progression and make it sound more smooth and more interesting with the chord flavors. Okay, so I hope you like this little introduction to getting a more smooth transition between your notes and a more interesting chord progression with some colorations. If you have any questions on this, please let me know in the comment section to this video. Now you can continue and watch my next video. My name is Matthias, and see you in the next video. Bye!